Okay, it is 5 minutes past our starting time, so I guess we will just get started right now. And anyone who hasn't joined would catch up with us at some point. Good thing is we also recording the event, so there will be a recording of it made available for those who are unable to join us live for any reason. And once again, good morning, good evening to everyone with different time zones. So I'm trying to account for everyone's time. But my name is Zingfa, and I'm going to be a moderator for today. Today is day 1 of 2, where we are inviting everyone to join our students on the African Ecology and Conservation course currently going in South Africa. This is a spring 2025 semester, and for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, we're having this event where we get to invite everyone to join our students and just have our students speak to them about research that they do. A lot of understanding of what semester abroad programs like OTS offers is different for everyone. And oftentimes the research component of it is not really highlighted. It's more about the experience of having to be in a different country, experience different cultures and people, expanding your network. That seem to be most of the conversations that we have. But on OTS, one thing that I think really makes us stand out compared to several other options that offer semester abroad programs is the fact that we do focus quite heavily on research and meaningful research that contributes to conservation issues and management issues. And over the next 2 days, that's what we hope to highlight. We just have some of our students, not all of them speaking over the next 2 days, but you would have a snapshot of a whole range of research options that we do. I wouldn't want to steal their thunder by explaining everything. I would allow them do all the talking, and then you will get to hear from the horse's mouth what it is from a student perspective to attend the African Ecology and Conservation and to go through several research types that we have. The first person that will speak to us today is an OTS student from Emory University, and her name is okay, that's Zingfa and forgetting names. I would remember it in 1 second and then I'll forget it again talking about Perry. Perry, you will be the first person to speak to us today, and she's first going to tell us all about what we call the long-term research project, or LRP for short. And after that, she's going to introduce her own talk. So Perry, over to you.
All right, let's share our slides.
Yes, go ahead.
There we go. Okay, and then we're gonna present and show from beginning. Perfect. Okay, so our talk today is called Tales of Ticks, Toads, and Tadpoles, the role of an African ecology and conservation student in long-term research. So what is a long-term research project? Basically, students participate in research projects that have been going on for generally many years. So we go out into the field for about a week and collect data, and then we do analysis of the data, and then write up full scientific papers from our findings. This project is super cool because we get to add data and information that will likely go on to be published by the scientists that we work with, and we get to add to the knowledge base about Kruger National Park. Okay.
Oh, or not. Oh, it's on that. Here, there we go. Now try.
Okay. Okay, so here are the 4 different LRP projects that we participated in this year. The first 2 were on ticks and frogs, and Janet and Laura will talk more about them in a minute. And then we also had tadpoles, which I worked on and I will talk about. And then we have invertebrates. So the invertebrate project, they basically worked on freshwater biodiversity of invertebrates in Kruger National Park. So they just went out into the field in different aquatic systems and they picked up bugs and they compared the data that they collected this year in the wet season, which we're currently in right now, to data that was collected last semester in the dry season. And then I'll talk more in depth to you guys about tadpoles, which I worked on. So why do we want to study tadpoles in Kruger National Park? First off, there are huge knowledge gaps in our information that we have about amphibians in Southern Africa. For example, in that field guide that you see there, which is what we use to identify the tadpoles, over half of the species in each genus, there was just no information. We don't know what the tadpoles look like for those frog species. And so there's currently global decline in anurans, and we need to establish a baseline of the frogs in Kruger National Park and their tadpoles as soon as possible so that it can be compared to monitoring that's done in the future. So our goals for this project was to address the knowledge gaps and continue monitoring the amphibians in Kruger National Park. We wanted to understand potential microhabitat drivers of amphibian distribution, such as species richness and tadpole abundance. And then we predicted that pan characteristics, that's what we call little ponds, would influence diversity and abundance. And we expected to find species similar to those that have been found in surveys in the past. So here's our team. So we were led by Nikisha, who is the lovely lead scientist on our project, and she will publish the data later on. We had 4 students on my project. We had Emma, our teaching assistant, come with us, and then we had 2 full-time game guards. So because we're working in a Big 5 game reserve and there's lions and elephants and all sorts of dangerous animals, we have armed game guards come with us, and they also have training in animal behavior so they can help us navigate situations where we might be with potentially dangerous animals. And then we also had 2 game guard training come with us one day, which was really fun. And so as you can see in the other picture, our methodology included basically going out into Kruger National Park and then getting out of our cars and just trucking on through the bush until we got to the coordinates of a little pan. And then we would use a dip net to put it through the water vigorously for a minute or so, and then take back whatever's in the dip net, which is usually a good amount of pond scum and algae, and then sort through that by hand, looking for little tiny tadpoles. And this was a crazy week because temperatures over 100 degrees. We were out there, but it was very cool. So the frog. And so here's a map of the sites. As you can see, some of the ones down to the south, those were some of the different ponds we looked at, similar to the pictures on the previous slide. And then some of the more northern sites looked like this picture where we were on kind of a mostly dried up river that had select pools of water. And at this site, we saw hippos and crocodile tracks and lots of interesting animals, a little bit freaky. So then after we had collected all of our tadpoles, we took them back to the lab to do DNA and identification. So the goal of our project was 2 parts. We took DNA from the tadpoles, but then we also preserved some in formalin for the Kruger Museum so that once we get the DNA results, we can know what each species looks like. So we can kind of fill in that knowledge gap. So you can see we took pictures of all of them, very detailed, and then that picture on the right where you can see the tadpole mouth, that was how we identified tadpoles. So we spent hours looking at their mouth parts under microscopes, basically counting the little rows of teeth. Okay, so our results. So for species richness, we caught a total of 1,617 tadpoles, 5 froglets, and 6 frogs across all 8 of our sites. Species richness ranged from 1 to 6 at the individual sites. At each of the sites, we had also taken water temperature, pH, conductivity, and dissolved oxygen, and we found that none of those correlated strongly with species richness. We did find that frog species richness was found to increase literally with the percentage of aquatic vegetation, which is very interesting. And you can think about how the whole system works. For instance, that picture I showed you of the sites on the river, we saw the hippos at that site. Hippos tend to eat or breaks up the aquatic vegetation, which means there's less habitat for tadpoles. So that might be why we find less tadpoles at that site. And then for identification, we identified a total of 9 frog species. However, most of the relevant genera lacked tadpole descriptions for at least half of the species. So hopefully we can help fill in some of those information gaps. And then we did DNA testing. We took DNA from a total of 40 frogs and tadpoles, and we are still waiting for those results, but I'm so excited for when we get them and we can see how many we actually correctly identified. That's the end of my section.
Okay, so one of the other projects that we focused on was ticks and frogs. So those are 2 different LRP projects. However, we had the same field sites, so we were in the field together. So the 2 field sites that we had were in Kruger National Park, and we called that Wild Wild, and then an area just outside Kruger National Park in the Bush-Buck Ridge region called Anthro Edge. And the question we were trying to answer was, how do different land management practices influence the abundance and species composition of ticks and frogs? So we're looking at the differences in these 2 areas. One has again, what Perry said, it has the big 5. It's a protected area through sand parks. And then Anthro Edge, we have more of a residential area. They have a population of around 50,000 people, and it's predominantly used for cattle grazing. And yeah, we saw a lot of cows when we were there. So there's a lot of, even though they're in a very similar proximity to each other, they are very different in terms of what vegetation and what species we see there. So we wanted to see how ticks and frogs differ between these 2 sites. And this is a continuation of work that students have done in the past, as well as with our professor. So we saw, we compared that data. Eventually, this will be compared to what they saw last semester. Okay, so for our data collection, we had kind of 3 different things that we were looking at between Kruger National Park and Anthro Edge. So first, what we did when we got out of our vehicle into the bush was, once we found our coordinate, we placed a camera trap at 10 sites in Kruger National Park and 10 sites in Anthro Edge. And these camera traps were to eventually collect data on what kind of animals do we see in the region. And this can be really important, especially when looking at data for ticks, because obviously ticks see a host. So looking at, okay, what host do we see in each site and how do these 2 compare? So the camera traps are collecting data on when an animal walks by, so we can see, okay, this is what kind of the different larger mammal species we have in the region. In addition to that, at 5 sites at each location, we did tick drags. So we did first a transect, a line-based tick drag, and then we additionally did a circular tick drag around the the circumference of the area that we were looking at. And there's a diagram of that at the bottom. And these tick drags were a PVC pipe with pieces of cloth kind of dangling off of them, and you drag them in a certain pattern around an area, and you're looking for ticks to cling to these just like they would your clothing. And then we analyzed those later. After taking big ticks off in the field, we looked at the smaller ticks under a microscope. And then the final thing we did to tackle the difference in frogs between the 2 sites, we put up audio moths, which are recording devices, and we looked at frog calls between the 2 sites. And we did 3 of those in Wild Wild and 3 of those in Anthro Edge. And we tended to put those around water sources because that tends to be where we see frog populations. And then there's a diagram on the right that shows the different sites that we did tick drags at. So after we came back from the field, we had to do analysis on our ticks. So once we we took the tick drags off of our little pole, and then we analyzed them each under a microscope and collected ticks and put them into tubes based on which site they were and which, if they were from the circular drag or the line drag. And then after that, we looked at them under the microscope and placed them into 3 genera that we saw, which were Amblyoma, Rhiphocephalus, and Hemophysalis. And we identified these using previous diagrams and classified them. So the cool things that we found were that we found a total of 1,822 ticks between our 2 sites, which is a lot. So we were classifying a lot of different ticks, but luckily not too many on us. And ticks are really important to study just because there are a lot of pathogens associated with ticks and tick-borne disease. In the US, obviously, we have Lyme disease, which is a big one. In South Africa, there aren't any. There's African tick bite fever, but it's not as bad as Lyme disease. So it wasn't too scary for us to be in the field looking at ticks. But yeah, so we found a lot of ticks, but 99.3% of them were found in Anthro Edge, and there was only 0.7% found in Wild, which is really interesting, which is why we want to look at our camera trap data to see were we seeing different wildlife in these 2 locations and how do these host types differ between these 2 sites. So we found a drastic difference between these 2. Additionally, we found way more larvae than we found adult ticks. So we found 98.6% of larvae compared to adult ticks. And then the last thing we looked at in our study was along the sites that we were doing tick drags, we also looked at biomass. So we took biomass of the grass in the region, and we looked at whether or not an increase in biomass would cause an increase in ticks or a decrease in ticks. And we found that there was a 0.065% increase in ticks for each unit of biomass.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. Now I'll be talking about the other side of the project, which was the Anuran audio. By the way, I'm Janet. I am a junior undergraduate student at Cornell University studying environment and sustainability, and I'm currently studying abroad here in South Africa with these amazing people, so I'm having a great time. But what we found on the frog side of this project, so essentially what we did was, as Laura mentioned, we deployed 5 audio moths inside the park and then 5 audio moths outside the park. What is an audio moth? An audio moth is essentially a little recorder, and I'll show you a picture in a little bit, that we deploy to a tree. We usually strap it to a tree, and what it does is it records sound. So I like to say, like, we like to eavesdrop on nature. But essentially the way our sampling protocol was that we had set it so that it would record the first 10 minutes of every hour from dusk to dawn. So we were really interested in seeing how does frog calling activity change throughout the night, as well as who's there and when are they there during the night. So we found really interesting results. This was a really exciting study because nothing has been done outside of the park in terms of looking into what frog species exist, or at least nothing official. So it's really exciting to get back this data and go through it. We found a total of 7 species outside of the park and 3 species inside of the park. And it was also really interesting to see those 3 species that we did find inside the park because there has been previous work done in the park, and it was interesting to contrast what we found versus what has been seen in historic data. So how did this work? We deployed these audio moths out. We went and retrieved them after a few nights, and then we essentially combed through all the recordings that we had taken. And that entails opening up these recordings on a software that's called Raven Pro, which is actually a full circle moment because this software was developed at my school at Cornell, and I work at the lab that developed it. So it was really cool using it in this context. So what we do is we'd open the recordings in Raven Pro, and then we'd look at it on a second-to-second basis, looking for these frog calls. Perry showed you a book earlier about frog calls, and so we essentially use that same book because it has a really useful library that shows you what frog calls look like. So essentially we're looking for sounds of interest and then trying to identify, first of all, was it a frog, or was it something else like a cow, or some insects that call in the night, or some birds. They tend to get very chatty in the early morning hours. If it's a frog, can we identify it to the species level? So this took a lot of combing through data, but it was really, really interesting to see what we found. And we analyzed a total of 16 hours of data across 48 recordings across all the sites. And out of all these recordings, we found a total of 18 anuran calls, with the most common species being the raccoon toad, which we found both inside and outside the park. So this was really interesting, seeing how land use might impact the species of frogs we are seeing and how that might give you insights into the biodiversity of an area. But yeah, so that was our long-term research project. We are going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about a day in the life of an AEC student during our LRP week. And we've got a little photo story for you, so we're very excited. So these were all pictures that we took during our long-term research project week when we were going out in the field every day. And this is kind of a little bit of what our projects look like. So this is mostly specific to Laura and I's fieldwork because it was really interesting because we got to work both inside and outside the park. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of what that looks like. Firstly, we wake up in the morning and then go to our field site, which is very exciting because even though we're just driving to a site, we're still driving through the park, and any drive in the park is a game drive. So even though we're like, we're not like leisurely going looking for animals, we still see animals, which is really exciting. And these are like some of our highlights from that week. We got to see some giraffes, some elephants, a hippo going into the river. And then we also saw some really cool birds that our birders were really excited for. So this was really fun. So we drive to our field site. We had two sites, as Laura was talking about. We had Anthro Edge, which was outside the park. So we'd go to the gate, get out of the park, and then all of a sudden the wildlife changes. And you go from seeing elephants and giraffes to seeing a lot of cows, as well as communities and seeing people live. So it was really exciting because just seeing the stark differences so quickly once you get out of the park was really insightful, as well as it helped us start thinking about what might be some of the drivers in the trends that we would soon be seeing in the projects that we were conducting. And these morning driving to the field in the morning was really cool because we'd see all the kids going to school and we'd wave at them. So that was really, really fun. We also had Wild Wild, which was inside the park because we were working in the park, as Perry had said earlier. We do need a game guard to protect us in case we see any fun animals. So how working in the park, what that entails is once you get to a site, it's also a really big privilege to be able to work in the park because we get access to places where most other tourists don't get to have access to. Like if I was visiting Kruger by myself, I wouldn't be able to get out of my car and just walk around. So it's really exciting that we get to be able to walk around Kruger and see the landscapes from a different perspective. So what that entails is getting out of the car, walking in a straight line behind our game guard so that he knows where everybody is, to our site. And then once our site has been deemed safe by our game guard, and we were with Thomas this week, and he's a great guy, then we are free to move around and conduct the tick drags in that circle and that weird transect line that Laura was showing you earlier. But we had a really good time in Wild Wild. We spent, I think, 2 days there. One of the days it rained, but that was also really cool to see how the landscape changes and how quickly water accumulates. We got to see some of the frogs that we hopefully recorded come out. So that was a really, really fun experience. So once we got to a field site, to a site where we would be conducting the tick drags and putting out cameras, we would put up an audio moth. This is me looking very determined. I promise I was having fun. Strapping an audio moth to a tree, and that's what the little recorders look like that record sounds. So we put up audio moths. We also conduct tick drags. This usually takes a long time. This tick drag specifically happened in Wild Wild, I believe, so inside the park. I personally like the tick drags that we did inside the park a lot better than the ones we did outside of the park because you have a lot of acacia trees that you have to walk through, and acacia trees, for those of you who don't know, have really big thorns. I wish I put a picture in there, but it can be kind of tricky to be navigating through trees and trying not to get stuck in them. But this was a lot of fun. So we did our tick drags, and then we also put up the camera traps that we talked about earlier. So that was, we're strapping them at about knee height, and we're making sure that we're clearing the path in front of the camera, just so that if it gets windy, for example, the grass moving isn't going to set off the camera. So that was a really good thing that we learned. Speaking of camera traps, I know we focused a lot about the tick drags and the audio moths, but this is us configuring the camera traps that we were to deploy. And so essentially what would happen is that it's a motion sensor. So once that is triggered, then the camera takes 3 photos. And this happens every time that sensor is triggered. With fieldwork also, you learn a lot of valuable lessons that has helped us in the course progress. And I feel like once we finish, we have 3 more weeks left in the course, but once we finish the course, I feel like that we've learned a lot, and our fieldwork or even research skills from when we first started this LRP, because this is the first kind of real project that we did, versus what we're going to be doing from on the capstone in next week is going to be so different. And I think it's been interesting now doing this presentation to look back and see like how we've evolved as researchers, like thinking of things that you wouldn't have thought about. Like, for example, when we're putting up these camera traps, we're not smart enough to, I mean, I shouldn't say that, but we didn't think that we should maybe turn on the camera after we have set it up on the tree. So we had turned on the camera and then we're setting it up. So we have a series of pictures of us just looking very determined, strapping these cameras to the trees. But it's all in a fun day's work, and they made for good laughter afterwards. So we also made a lot of great friends along the way. This was, as I said earlier, one of the first actually the first project that we did inside Kruger, and one of like the first like long-term studies that we've done. And so it was really great to like bond with all the other students on the course, but also get to know your faculty, because you're working with them in a very not intensive is not the right word, but you see a lot of them, and they're there for like your every single question you have. So it was really rewarding getting to know them, and as well as like our game guard Thomas, for example. He's a really great guy, and we shared a lot of jokes in the field and laughs. So I think moments like this makes this experience really rewarding for me personally. And then on your far right, you can see a picture of Promise and Petunia, who are the 2 people in the middle. They're 2 of the people who live close to where we were doing the fieldwork in Anthro Edge. And they were essentially kind of like our local guides, and they're hired by OTS to come and help on these long-term projects or on the work that OTS does. And it was really rewarding to kind of like work with them and hear their stories, as well as the local knowledge that they have. Like, they were showing us all the fruits that we would pass by on trees and tell us, oh, this one you can eat, this one you can't, this one's really, really tasty, try this one. So it was really fun. We had, dances, laughs, and, just a really fun time. And then so once we finish on a day in the field, we come back to campus, and then we kind of like unpack all the equipment, and then we have, a bit of time to unwind. My favorite thing to do was have an outdoor shower here on campus. So here at the research station, there's 2 outdoor showers. And the reason I like it so much is because one of them, while I was showering, 25 elephants walked past that view. And it was the most mesmerizing thing that I've ever experienced. It was probably, to this date, my top experience so far from this trip. So I'm a big advocate for outdoor showers. And then the picture on the left is kind of this really nice rest area that we have on campus. So our campus is gorgeous, and it's a really great place to be. So once we're all kind of settled down and had some downtime, it's time to analyze all the data we've collected, right? So here's a picture of me sitting in the library where we are right now, looking at some calls that I found on one of the recordings and trying to figure out what am I looking at and what frog I might be looking at. And then the tick people spent a lot of time at the microscope looking at the tick drags, picking up every single tick they saw and putting it into ethanol to be ID'd later. And the picture on the far right that you see is what our lab looks like from outside, and it's actually the building right behind us, which is really exciting. But this is a gorgeous campus, and it's really a blessing to be able to be here. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys. Thank you so much. And do you have any questions for us?
Thank you very much, guys. It was really cool having to listen to you all speaking. Thank you, Perry. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Laura. So it was really nice having to hear all of you speak and tell us about your research experience. And actually, more than that, uh, the outdoor shower, that's usually a story I always tell whenever I speak to potential students. I will tell them, you probably would have no idea, and perhaps my words wouldn't do justice to that experience, but it's a big talking point to all students every semester. And there's something called an outdoor shower. When you get to Skukuza, just make sure you get into it, and you just might be lucky to, while taking a shower, just see an animal just walk right past you, or a giraffe just grazing right next to you. And usually the experience is usually always fun to see kind of their eyes just go wow. So that kind of really made me smile that you also spoke about that. And it also accommodates for all height types. That's another good thing about that shower
Yes.
outside. So
Yes.
so that's really a good one. Well, we will open the floor for questions. If there's any question, you should all be able to unmute yourself and ask. If you want to do that, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or put your hands up, and I would allow you to speak. If, however, you rather prefer typing your question in the chat, you can also do that, and I will read the questions, or I guess they'll be able to see it and read it and answer that. So while we are waiting for you to decide your questions, whether you're going to type it or you're going to put your hands up and be given the opportunity to speak, I have just one question to perhaps, I don't know, any of you could answer that, but maybe let's start with Laura, about the take questions. First, really exciting to hear you speak. And I just really, every single time I hear you speak, I know I've said this before, but then I just always marvel at the fact that you're not a science major student, but you really embrace science. And if anyone doesn't know, it just looks like you're just a scientist. And that just really blows my mind. Your question, did you find more tick species in with respect to size? So you kind of showed that you had a lot more on the outside than the inside, but did you find specific types, say a certain species, or you found more of that outside on the outside anthro edge than you find on the wild? Did you check that, or you just did kind of numbers outside and numbers inside?
Yeah, we did. So now I'm like forgetting exactly which ones we found where, but we did
Mhm.
find the most amblyoma, and like overwhelmingly there were just the most of those.
Mhm.
And I feel like there was a slight difference in the different genera between the two sites, but now I can't remember which one we found more
Right,
of. But
right.
yeah, tended to be similar with the most amblyoma at both sites.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's really interesting, because I'm thinking perhaps maybe this will be a question for next time, which is the thing about LRPs. You always kind of add onto the building blocks. You perhaps meet already a foundation set, and then you build the first layer, and another set comes, and it kind of always keeps adding to that blocks. But perhaps something that might be interesting to see in future for maybe next semester or whatever semester else we will go back to this, is to just see these species that are found. You might want to look at the disease load, for example, that they have, and just see, does that really make sense on species that are found on the anthropoid versus those that are found in the wild. But you've both really, or all three of you has really said some really exciting things that I think would be really very exciting to hear you guys talk about that. And for Perry, yes, okay, go ahead,
I
sorry.
was just going to say that I do believe that over the summer, they're going to do disease analysis on the ticks that we collected. So we did preserve those in ethanol, and I believe that they will be analyzed to see what diseases are present. So that is kind of the next step in the project, is to look at, okay, we see more here, but what's the diseases
Mhm.
look like in those two
Mhm.
locations? And that can tell us a lot about like the health of the ecosystem, and like what are transmissible to humans, what are transmissible to the cattle, because that can be a big thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, that is the next step.
Oh, that's coming even sooner than I thought. So I was thinking perhaps another semester or two, but it's happening right in the summer. So that's exciting. I will hold Liesel's leg to that, and perhaps follow her all through summer to say, what have you found out? But that's really exciting to hear that it's coming quite soon. Uh, so, Perry, you mentioned, I guess all three of you also mentioned the fact that this is a big five reserve, a big five reserve. And just for the benefit of perhaps those American students, or maybe those who might not be very familiar with that term, when you mention the fact that the Kruger is a Big Five reserve and hence you'd have to go with armed game guards, what do you mean by Big Five?
So the Big Five are basically the most dangerous animals to hunt, as decided by the earlier people of this region. And so those are lions, leopards, African buffalo, damn it, elephants. Which one am I forgetting?
Wait,
Did you say
no,
leopard?
she said
Leopard.
wait.
Lion.
Elephant, lion. Oh, rhino.
Right.
Oh.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, but all of these animals, if we came across them, technically could be very dangerous to us. So it's important that we have people with us that understand their behavior. Like if an elephant comes walking up to the pond that we are collecting tadpoles in, we're getting out of there because we don't mess with elephants.
Right. Okay. Great. That's exciting and good to hear. Thanks for those. Let me allow if anyone else has a question to us, so I don't do all the talking. If anyone has any question to any of our three presenters, Perry, Janet, and Laura, feel free to ask now. I would also check in the chat if there's any question that has been posed there. I'm seeing Sfiso Shani typing. I'm trying to type, but mine is a bit long. Okay, so we will wait for that question to come through while it's being typed. Anyone else? Oh, there we go. It's there. Thank you guys for what an awesome talk, Perry. I am a herpetologist from University of Western Cape doing my honors. You mentioned that observation covariates such as pH, dissolved oxygen, and temperature did not influence species richness. I'm interested in Schemademer currents because they have crazy tadpoles that thrive in oxygen poor environments. Did you notice any changes in the number of tadpoles for this species as currents between your study sites? Is that something you checked, or do you have any thoughts on that, Perry?
I don't remember necessarily that specific species. I think that most of the data we collected, the assumption was that our sites had similar enough like values for things like the dissolved oxygen and the pH and everything, that they were all pretty well within the ranges of tadpoles. And so potentially the reason we didn't find a big difference in anything with these variables is because all of our sites were pretty similar.
Okay.
So
Cool. But I guess that's a potential very interesting question that came up from Spiso. And I guess if you will liaise with Liesel, I'm sure once, especially over the summer, since lots of, well, no, sorry, this should be Josie, I guess, for the tadpole project. Did Josie lead that LRP? I'm just guessing because I know in the past she's been the one that's one of her babies. So I'm not sure who led it, but anyways, I guess this is a question which, if you would want to liaise with the faculty who led it, you might be able to play around with that data and try to see if something of that nature could come up. But thanks for that question, Sfiso. I'm seeing more typing coming up, so I guess we will see what else is coming. Oh, it was Nikisha. Okay, sorry. Oh, so Nikisha. But anyways, Josie works a lot very close with Nikisha. So if you cannot directly get hold of Nikisha, I'm sure Josie will be able to link you to her and see if you'll be able to get an answer to that question from the data that has been collected. Any more questions from anyone? I have one or two more just in case if there's none.
Zingfa, it looks like there's more in the chat.
Oh, hold on. Okay. So if you can see any on your side, let's see. Hold on. Oh, there we go. I have some issues with my mic and I have a few more questions. Oh, there we go. Still Spiso. What are some of the pond characteristics that you hypothesize might affect tadpoles diversity, if I'm getting the hypothesis correctly? That's the first one. Second, since you were using a tick net, I'm sure it caught other species, if available in the pen. Did you find anything interesting other than tadpoles? The third question for the frogs, that Janet there, I noticed there were different species that listed for inside the park and out. That's my question. Perfect. Do you think there are any environmental factors that could have caused that, or the diversity is similar between the areas? It's just a matter of not getting some calls from certain species. So let's start with the first two, which are, I guess, back to Perry. I guess that would be your question. What are some of the pond characteristics that you have at the size might affect the diversity of tadpoles?
Okay, so some of the different characteristics we looked at was we took soil samples and looked at the soil moisture. We did vegetation analysis of the, so basically kind of predicted or guessed how much of the vegetation surrounding the pond there was. So like, say there was some aquatic vegetation, we would say there was 20% aquatic vegetation in the pond. So we looked at vegetation, we looked at grassy outside of the pond, we looked at woody outside of the pond, and then we did all of like the dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, different water quality monitors. And so we did not have any major hypothesis surrounding which variables would affect the tadpoles. We were more gathering the data and seeing what showed up. Our data did show that the vegetation was a pretty strong factor, especially the aquatic, probably because that gives them a habitat and a place to hide in. And so that was the best indicator that we found. And then we were using a dip net and we did catch other species. We caught a lot of water scorpions. That was a big one, I remember. And then interestingly, at some of the ponds, we found the Teribia granifera, which is an invasive mollusk or snail. And so we did locate those at some of the ponds, which was interesting.
Cool. And the third question, is that Laura or Janet? I don't remember.
I can
About the
answer
frogs.
that one about the frogs.
Okay,
That's
go
a great
for it.
question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. I didn't state this earlier, but there was a study that was done a year before we did this study inside the park, and so all the species we didn't find, how should I rephrase this? So all the species we found outside the park were also found inside the park at the same time last year. So I think it might have been a matter of either study design or just environmental conditions for why we weren't picking them up this year. We only recorded 3 species inside the park and 7 outside this park. I also think we also did, I mentioned earlier that this was a big learning step for a lot of us. So we deployed 10 recorders, but we only looked at data from 6 of them because there were some failed deployments. We also could change our survey design in terms of how we're deploying the audio mots, maybe a bit lower to the ground so that you're catching some of those frog calls that aren't as loud. Also, it was interesting to see that despite the survey protocol being same across both inside and outside the park, we're picking up more frogs outside the park than we did inside the park. So I'm wondering, like, changing, some of the things that we did do this time, like how much more we could get. A lot of the places that we did deploy outside the park in Anthro Edge, you got like a lot of cowbell noises because, you did see there were a lot of cows. And so maybe picking more secluded areas. But then I guess that defeats the point because we are interested in how land use management changes. But I think it was more of a matter of us not picking up certain frog species, especially inside the park, because we did try to keep a lot of the characteristics similar, with the only thing being different is the land use management practices. So like essentially like your rainfall as well as your elevation should have been the same across both sites, inside and outside, to account for those.
Right, that's exciting. Yeah, because I also had that as one of my questions. So on the flip, you did say all the species you found outside, you found on the inside.
Inside in previous work.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you find, is there any of the species that in your work that you found on the inside that was not found on the outside? You should have a few of those. Yeah. Do you remember any off the top of your head, perhaps?
I think we actually did have one of them. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think we might have had one, which was really interesting. But even for like outside the park, I I kind of briefly alluded to it earlier, but no work has been done outside the park. So it was really like exciting to just begin to establish this baseline data, as well as see like where it can grow from here, because frogs are good in what's the word, indicator species. So maybe that gives you some insight into like what's actually happening in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And just as a side note, is the fact that you did mention this as a learning curve for you as students coming. Just maybe a bit of background for the other listeners who are not aware of how far you've come. This is almost 3 months ago when you did this LRPs, because you're almost at the end of your 100 days. You just have like 3 weeks to the end of it, and you did this round about 2.5 weeks into your 100 days stay at OTS, and now you're almost at the end. The really exciting thing, as someone who has worked with OTS from my perspective, is seeing how students come from that point of writing workshops / LRP right at the beginning of the semester to capstones now at the end of the semester, and having learned all of this, picked all of these skills, and made all of these mistakes of having to take videos and pictures of yourself via camera traps, and learning from all of those. And right now, preparing for capstones, where literally all your academics have to do is organize a workshop with any resource person and just say, hey guys, here's a challenge. Can you come up with a potential research questions and methods? And we just facilitate that process for you. And you just take the driving seat, and it's more of a student driven project. And that's what we do at Capstone, which is what you all will be doing from this week into next week. So it's really exciting to see how you've built on all this experience from the beginning of the semester to really now literally stand on your feet and do something. So that's really exciting to see. There's more questions from so awesome, Perry. Thank you. If you'll be doing summer surveys, please let Lawrence and Don, any of the coordinators, know that I'm interested in getting involved with your project. I recently worked with a PhD student from Utah who has recently moved to Cornell University, named Jack Phillips, and we're looking at habitat and respiratory strategy, effects on hypoxia performance in Anuran tadpoles from South Africa. We sampled almost all the provinces, but could not sample Mpumalanga. Interesting. Thoroughly, and it would be interesting to sample inside the Kruger National Park. Your study is super cool, and I'll try to reach out and chat more about it. Tadpole supremacy, yay! Right, okay, thanks, so that's really interesting, and I'm glad that you're able to join us and also get to hear this perspective of the one province that you did not get to sample as thoroughly as the other provinces. And I'm very sure that there is opportunities for lots of conversations that can go on. And Josie and Liesel, who are the resident academics at OTS there, or even Sia, who is right now on the call, you could just link up to any of them, and I'm sure they would be able to develop this conversation with you and just explore that possibility of having you come around to do sampling, I guess, or at least if the data is shareable, you will be able to get access to this and all those questions. I cannot give you direct answers, but if you link up to any of these three, they are on the call, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer some of your questions. So Liesel, Josie, Sia would be able to give you some directions on how to go about getting some answers to these very interesting questions that you have asked. And I'm glad to hear that you've worked with people from Utah and Cornell. Janet is from Cornell, so I'm sure that also perhaps got excited that the name of our college gets mentioned in there. But thanks, Belinda, for your message. Thank you for your presentation. Very well done. My question is on the ticks. Do you have any thoughts on the reason behind the high larva to adult ratio? Right, that's something that would go to Laura, I guess. Who did that? Yeah, Laura, go for it.
Yeah, so this is something interesting that we found, and we didn't really expect to find, just because you would think that you would be finding a lot of adult ticks. And when we were in the field, actually, when we were doing our sampling, we were getting super frustrated because you usually can see ticks. They're big enough on a white sheet that you can be like, oh, there's one, there's one, there's one. And we'd look at our sheets every 5 meters of our survey just to make sure that we could grab the big ticks so that we weren't losing them in the field. So in the field, we were looking and we're like, there's no ticks, like there's none here. And we were getting super frustrated, like, how are we supposed to do our study if there's no ticks anywhere? And then we brought them back to the lab and put them under the microscope, and we were like, oh my goodness, there are so many ticks. And it was just because there were all the larvas and not the full-size adult ticks. So essentially, we did a little research into why this is the case. There's a possibility that some of the adult ticks were falling off even within the 5 meters, even though we were checking it. Often it's possible that they were falling off. There are also some studies that said that the tick drags are more successful in picking up the little ticks than the bigger ticks. So again, that's something else that could be happening, as well as just the seasonality with possibly larvae being more present in this season than possibly in other seasons. Yeah, there's a lot of different things, and rainfall and fire and all those things play a role in whether there's more larvae or more adult ticks. So it is something that we could look into further, but there are a few predictions about why we saw that, because it was a very drastic difference.
Right. Absolutely. Very interesting take on that. Yeah. I mean, there's so much more that we can develop from all this research, but this is just a sneak peek. And like Laura mentioned at the beginning, Perry mentioned at the beginning, this is a long-term project. So it's really kind of like playing the long game and looking at the bigger picture. This is just one block added to the other blocks. So there's still a lot more that can be and will be done about this research going forward. We almost out of our allocated time for this, but I will still give space for one more question if there's any. If there isn't any, then I would wrap things up. But just before we run out of this, just a reminder that tomorrow at the same time, we're meeting again for more exciting talks. We're going to look at another kind of research that the students are doing, faculty-led foundational projects and homestays. So you don't want to miss that. If you enjoy today, I'm sure you will enjoy tomorrow as well. But thanks so much to our three presenters for today. Thanks, Perry. Thanks, Janet. And thanks, Laura, for your really exciting talks. I personally really enjoyed listening to it, and the fact that we have so many questions coming up also, I guess, is indicative that you gave a very exciting talk, and hence the question coming up. But thanks for your time, and thanks to all our guests, I would call them, all those who joined through. Thanks for taking out your time to join us over the last hour, where we have been speaking tomorrow at, guess, 10 Central Time. That should be 5 p.m. South African time. We will be meeting back here again for another hour, where we'll get to have our students speak to us some more about their research and their time at OTS South Africa. And please feel free to invite other people who are not here tomorrow. Hopefully we get more numbers. It's nice to see some of our alumni. Belinda was at OTS last semester, so it's good to see alumni coming through. Good to see other staff from the US and people from all over join too, but really appreciate everyone. And with this, I will say, I see there's no question popping through. So thanks everyone for joining through, and I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.